Chapter 10, personality. We'll talk about psychodynamic perspectives, humanistic perspectives, trait perspectives, and then we'll follow up with social cognitive perspectives, biological perspectives, and personality assessments. All right, so psychodynamic perspectives. One of the most important concepts within this, I should say one of the most important theorists I'll talk about within this is Freud, Sigmund Freud. He does a lot with the psychodynamic perspective. Personality in this area, personality is a pattern of enduring and distinctive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that characterize the way an individual adapts to the world. Ultimately, that is the definition of a personality. It's how people interact with each other, the emotions that you present, the distinctive characteristics and abilities and behaviors that characterize that individual, your personality. Freud developed psychoanalysis through his work with patients suffering from hysterical symptoms. These hysterical symptoms ultimately have physical symptoms with no physical cause. So there's no true reason or understanding as to why somebody's behaving a way that they are. You know, they might have some hysteria in some form. They're acting abnormal in various forms, but there's no physical reason as to why they would be doing so. Freud believed these symptoms represented conflicts between sexual drive and duty. Most of what Freud did was based on sexuality and sexual drive in its various forms. And he says that because of sexual drive, people often act abnormally. Freud believed that most personality is unconscious. He talked about the id, ego, and superego. Id, the part of the person Freud called the it, consisting of the individual's or sexual energy. So that's who you are internally, the consistency of the unconscious drive. Then the ego, the Freudian structure of personality, deals with the demand for reality. So it is who you are. It is how you respond. Superego, structure personality, serves as the harsh internal judge of the individual's behavior. So the superego gives you that morality structure, or helps you to understand or to judge internally your conscience, essentially, of your choices you're making and responses of that. It is basically who you are. Ego is your personality, and then your superego is your conscience. Defense mechanisms are tactics that the ego uses to reduce anxiety by unconsciously distorting reality. So defense mechanisms, we all use defense mechanisms in various forms. You know, we identify some of these in other people probably a little bit quicker than we can identify these things in ourselves. But ultimately, defense mechanisms are those characteristics that help us to deal with things in life. You know, I just a minute ago, like right before class, I had a conversation with a colleague of mine. And amidst this conversation, we talked about my perspective on things, her perspective on things, and I became defensive because of what she was saying. Because obviously, I'm right. I'm always right. I mean, just the way it is. I'm never wrong. But it's difficult sometimes. I know within myself that it's difficult for me to adapt and accept different things. In regard to the conversation we were having, we were talking about a grading perspective on how to grade an assignment versus another assignment. And I ultimately used one of my defense mechanisms, which is to rely on my trainings and that sort of thing to reinforce my beliefs. There are various defense mechanisms people can use. One of them is denial. And this is where your ego refuses to acknowledge what's happening. Displacement is directing impulses at a less threatening target. So directing what's his fault. Sublimation is a displacement and conscious wish in an appropriate way. So you're putting your thoughts and your intentions in a different area than just on yourself. Projection, then we see in others what we fear, despise in ourselves. So if I were to look at another person and say, well, you're this or that, and that's really just a representation of myself, it's projection. Reaction formation, complete opposite of unconscious desires. While I might really truly want something to happen, my presentation is completely and totally different than what I want truly on the inside. And then repression pushes impulses back into the unconscious mind. So I'm denying myself, and just simply doing what other people would want me to do. They're repressing my personal thoughts and ideas. Anybody have any questions on any of these mechanisms? Freud believed humans go through universal stages of personality development, and each stage relates to a sexual erogenous zone. Okay, so we all have zones that we're going to deal with, and depending on the age of that individual, then that's where we concentrate a lot of our erogenous. That's our sexual behaviors. According to Freud, certain areas of our life, we are focused sexually in that direction. For example, when you're 0 to 18 months, you're an oral stage. So all things are orally related. Anything to do with your mouth, sucking on things, putting things in your mouth, anything mouth related, oral stage, 0 to 18 months. Anal stage, then, anywhere from 18 to 36 months. So anything to deal with the anal area. Phallic stage, 3 to 6 years. Latency period, 6 years to puberty. Genital stage, adolescence, and adulthood. We'll look at each one of these a little bit more. All right, so in this oral stage, 0 to 18 months, moving from infantile dependency toward autonomy is what's the goal here. And dependency is what happens as a result of dysfunction in this area, or the personality trait dependency. Anal, 18 to 36, personality trait obsessiveness. Oedipal stage is your competitiveness. That's obviously your phallic stage that I just mentioned a minute ago. Latency, 6 years to puberty, and genital puberty and onward. So Freud believed that if there is damage or if there's a problem, either over or under indulging in any of these areas, then we can get stuck in that area. Fixation is what that is called. So if we have trauma that happens at a certain age, then you can get stuck in that area. So for example, let's look at the 0 to 18 months with the dependency age, the oral stage. If you have trauma or something occurs or something is overstimulating you during your 0 to 18 months, you're overindulging, you could be fixated on oral things. You could be fixated on dependency issues. It essentially is what you were supposed to be accomplishing in terms of your personality during that 0 to 18 months. So you could have over-exaggeration on oral things in your life. So I often, challenge people to go back and look at the different fixations or different personality characteristics that they have, because according to Freud, there's something drastic or severe would have happened, either overindulging or underindulging in that area of their life. For me, obviously, some of you know some of my background. My mother passed away when I was 1.5 years. So all the trauma that I experienced in the first year and a half of my life has caused me to be dependent, have some dependency issues. Trust issues, essentially, is where we're coming in with that as well. But fixation occurs when over or underindulging occurs. Anal retentive person, somebody that is in that second stage, the anal fixation, that they become that anal retentive person that that we struggle to deal with from time to time. And then the Oedipus complex. According to Freud, a boy's intense desire to replace his father and enjoy the affections of his mother, all based on that boy's personality characteristic. During that early, between 2 to 4 or 5, the young boy will begin to place some sexual desire or his personal affections on his mother. And because of the Oedipus complex, to be honest, it's a natural thing that occurs in many boys. They will look at their father as an opposing force, and because of the affection they have for their mother, they don't begin to realize that that's an inappropriate sexual attraction, and they begin to look at their father as somebody that goes against that child's goals. Child's goal is to be having that affection, and they need to figure out what is an appropriate affection. Typically, most boys will figure that out without much problem. But if this Oedipus complex extends into later in life, they don't resolve some of those issues that occur there, and they continue to look at that father as an opposing force. That Oedipus complex can carry into adulthood, and this sometimes is where you get some of the people that have a strong attraction to, we'll just call them cougars. The boys that are really, or the men that are really interested in women that are much significantly older. They want to have your father, or excuse me, your mother, and that's your goal, is to have your partner be somebody that's much older, 20, 30 years older. They're acting like your mother, or the opposite side of that as well. Young ladies that have some sexual attraction toward men that are posing as their father. All because based in this Oedipus complex, this unresolved sexual attraction that occurred, or unresolved issues that occurred early in life, typically around 2 to 4, 5 years old, in that ballpark. Many theorists oppose Freud, even though some of what I'm saying may make sense, and Freud's approach could make sense to some. There are other theorists that oppose these views. Karen Horney believed that the need for security, not sex or aggression, is the most important need. She believed that having, we think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs there, this sense of security and the need for security is one of the most foundational things. Well, Freud believed that it was sexual issues. Horney believed that it was security issues that are most fundamental in life. Carl Jung developed the concept of the collective unconscious, a storehouse for archetypes. He believed that the collective unconscious is the impersonal, deepest layer of the unconscious mind, shared by all human beings because of their common ancestral past. So we all have a common bond, which is that collective unconscious for humanity, a deepest desire to make sure that humanity is successful, and we have our goals toward humanity. Archetypes, term for emotionally laden into ideas and images in the collective unconscious that have rich and symbolic meaning for all people. The idea that happiness is something that we're to strive for, the smile on a person's face, good positive relationships, effective communication, some of those principles that are not bound by culture. All humans desire those things. And then Adler's individual psychology stresses that people are striving for perfection. We make choices and decisions in our life that are geared toward perfection in various forms. Weaknesses of the psychodynamic perspective include over-reliance on reports from the past. So whatever occurred in the past, and we're still weighing a significant amount of our life on what happened 20 years ago or so. We're not truly considering what has happened in most recent years. Another issue is overemphasis of the unconscious mind, and truly trying to make sense of what is happening in your unconscious, whereas there might be other things that are occurring in your mind or with logical thought that is not necessarily weighed in this. However, some of the strengths of the psychodynamic approach include recognizing the importance of childhood. Childhood, I'm sure all of you could report that there are significant things that have occurred in your childhood that shape who you are. I will absolutely say, for me, that is definitely something that has shaped who I am as a person. My experiences with my mother passing and my father passing, and my interactions with my siblings has shaped who I am today. And another strength is conceptualizing development through stages, because ultimately many of us, almost all of us, will develop through different stages in life to form who we are as individuals today. And then finally, calling it the role of unconscious processes and behavior. Sometimes we act without thinking. Sometimes we naturally are leaning in a certain direction because of our personal experiences. And that's ultimately what we're saying here. Calling attention to that role in our life helps us to put a more of a definition to what is happening and why some of those things are occurring in life. Humanistic perspective then stresses that a person, we talked about humanism before, but ultimately within humanism, we all have good positive qualities and traits. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is an instrumental aspect of this. Self-actualization, that highest peak that he established there, is the idea that we all have our highest human need being self-actualization. We have that humanistic approach to life where we're all living out our best because we are all good innately. And that peak ultimately says right there, you are the best person ever, regardless of some of those other things that occur. Carl Rogers' approach then established the foundation of personal growth studies. He believed each of us is born with a tendency toward growth. We all can start at the very beginning, but we have somewhere to go in the end. We can't get stifled by all these other things that are occurring in life. We have a direction we need to head, and that focus toward the end is incredibly important. He also said that we all have a sense of what is good and bad for us. We know right between wrong. We don't have to be taught that. We know what is right and what's wrong, according to Rogers. He also said there's a need for unconditional positive regard. I think all of us like to have good things told us. We like to be reported to good things, have positive things happening in our lives. And according to Carl Rogers, that is true. We have a need for unconditional positive regard. And this positive regard referring to the individual's need to be accepted, valued, and treated positively regardless of his or her behavior. And then we have conditions of worth and standards that the individual must live up to in order to receive positive regard from others. There's a standard of living. Don't kill anybody, don't steal things, don't do some of these kind of things. And if you do, you're not living up to your conditions of worth, and you are not worthy of your positive regard. However, we all have that desire to push toward that. And the humanistic perspectives promote the positive capacities of human beings. As humans, according to the humanistic approach, we are innately good people, and we need to live out those things. Weaknesses of this approach are a tendency to be too optimistic. There are some people that unfortunately do embrace a lot of negativity. The opposition of this is that we're too optimistic about the characteristics and individuality of individuals, and that we're placing too much of an emphasis on the good things that are innately within us. There's also an inclination to downplay personal responsibility. It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. I'm a good person. It's just all these bad things that have happened to me. Well, there might be some truth to that. There may have been some bad things, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we all need to take responsibility for what's happening in our, and how we choose to live our life. We cannot take responsibility for those things that have happened to us, but we can take responsibility for how we want our lives to go, and using resources and tools that are around us to improve. Weaknesses of the humanistic approach says that it's not that person's fault, it's everybody else's fault. They still just need to make sure that they are a good person. Perspective trait theories emphasize personality consists of traits, broad, enduring dispositions that lead to characteristic responses. So we all have individual traits. Gordon Allport was one of the individuals that emphasized trait perspectives. He stated that traits should produce consistent behavior in different situations. So we're not changing our traits just because we're in a new environment, although many of us probably do respond differently for things in different situations. In one situation, you might be very laid back and calm, cool, and collected, whereas in another situation, you might be the center of attention. According to Gordon Allport, though, traits should produce consistent behavior in different situations. You're always laid back, or you're always the center of attention. Whatever that personality is, it is consistent regardless of the situation. He used the lexical approach to personality traits, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, this involves using all the words in natural language that could describe a person as a basis for understanding the traits of that personality. So determining all of the different things, whatever you could call a person, and then putting it on a scale, figuring out where do you fit on that scale. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Current dominant perspective in personality psychology is the 5-factor model, which is, you can use the acronym OCEAN for this: openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay, so let's look at these things. OCEAN, the acronym OCEAN: openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So on this chart, you can see from the low score and the high score, openness on a low score prefers routine, very conventional, whereas on a high score, very curious, very independent. Consciousness then on the low side of this, impulsive, careless, disorganized, but on the high side then, hardworking, dependable, and organized. Extroversion on the low score, quiet, reserved, and withdrawn, whereas on the high score then they're outgoing, warm, and adventurous. Agreeableness, critical, uncooperative, and suspicious on the low side, and then on the high, helpful, trusting, and empathetic. Neuroticism then, calm, even-tempered, and secure, and then high side, anxious, unhappy, negative emotions. Does anybody have any questions over the 5-factor model of personality traits? This is really where you should focus your attention in terms of understanding personality traits. So ultimately, this model is what's really truly embraced in current psychology, using this OCEAN model: openness, consciousness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Anybody have any questions here? Trait approaches are criticized for focusing on broad dimensions and not attending to each person's uniqueness. Now, while there might be some truth in that, I would feel that most people are able to fit into one of these areas and be able to identify some things there. But we also need to recognize that each one of us are individuals. We all have unique characteristics and traits that we can bring to the situation, and we need to embrace and accept and celebrate those unique characteristics. So personality, part 2, second part of that. Previously, we talked about psychodynamic, humanistic, and trait perspectives. Today, we're going to get into social cognitive, biological, and personality assessments. So social cognitive perspectives on personality emphasize the conscious awareness, what we are fully aware of going on around us. It also emphasizes beliefs, what you and I hold as important factors within ourselves. The belief systems that we hold, those factors are also a component of social cognitive perspectives. And expectations, those things, the desires that we have, and those ambitions that we have for life, those goals, all are emphasized within social cognitive perspectives on personality. While incorporating factors from behavior and environment. So both of these factors, all of them that I've just mentioned, behavior and environment, plays into our belief system, what we believe our goals, our ambitions in life, plays against and with our behaviors and environments. So it's really a partnership between all of these things, how they're interacting and how we present ourselves to society. And while also considering how things play within our own personal lives, which is your personal cognitive, your mental state, and your mental capacity to handle different things in society and still present with different behaviors. I'm just a person just a second ago texted me saying that he's fed up with some of the things he's doing at work. It's those social factors that play against his personality and his mental processes all involved. I know for a fact he's not taking care of the mental side of things, so it's working against his social interactions, which adversely impacts his work relationships. It causes a lot of problems within that. It's all based on our social cognitive perspectives of our personality traits. Bandura believed these factors reciprocally interact, all the ones that I just mentioned just a moment ago. There are two key concepts of social cognitive theory. First is self-efficacy, and it's that ability to believe in yourself. And you can master a situation, you can accomplish and conquer all of those things that you'll deal with, and you'll be able to produce those positive outcomes. And then there's also the factor of personal control. So the two concepts within social cognitive theory: self-efficacy, personal control. Personal control refers to an individual's beliefs about whether the outcomes of their actions depend on their own internal acts or on external events. So whether those factors are because I have control in a situation or because those things are working against me, or those factors, I can only fail because everybody wants me to fail or because my environment wants me to fail. It's all a setup, and that's all personal control. The external events helps us to either decide, can we control the situation in ourselves, or do we have the ability to thrive? Do we have that grit to overcome the situations that we might encounter? Now, granted, there are situations in life where there are definitely things outside of our personal control that hinder us and impact us. There's different things within society that hinder our ability to truly thrive. There's other factors, though, that we do have control over, and we need to make sure that we understand what things we do have control over and control those. Have the ability and have the understanding that we can thrive. Have the belief within yourself that you can thrive, and then realize those things that you don't have control over and make sure that those things are placed where they properly should be. And you don't put too much emphasis on those things that you cannot control, that hinders us from truly being successful. In 1968, Mitchell's controversial book, Personality and Assessment, stressed that people people do not behave consistently across different situations. He says that people's personality traits will vary from culture to culture, from situation to situation, from circumstance to circumstance, and from people group to people group. There's a lot of variancy. And even though his book was controversial, there are some things within his book that do make sense. Many times, you and I, when we interact with other people, depending on the environment in which we are, it will determine how we behave. A newer environment, probably a little bit more laid back and reserved than if we're extremely comfortable with others, and then we allow our true colors to show a little bit more. And it all depends on the culture. And that there are situations where your behavior should change. The behavior that you have in church or at a funeral or in a library is totally different than what you would have if you're at a football game or basketball game or at a bar or some of these other things that you might be more excited at. Rather, they tailor their behavior to suit particular situations, and that's ultimately what I've just been referring to. Personality psychologists believe personality does predict behavior for some people some of the time. Very specific personality characteristics predict behavior better than very general ones. Okay, so there are very specific character traits that can help you to determine how you might be interacting in a situation. Such as if you have that type A personality, you might have the tendency to be more of a domineering person. That person that is always willing to go out and to pursue things and take the initiative and take charge in different situations. Personality characteristics are more likely to predict behavior in weak versus strong situations as well. So in weak situations, those characteristics might be more dominant, more prevalent. If you are able to overcome and control a situation, you're coming into a situation and you have the ability to make an impact or an influence on the environment, it's more likely that you will. You know, if it's a very domineering situation, there's a situation where the protocol is already laid out and set, and structure is set, you might not have as much of an impact on that situation. You know, I think of a very highly structured situation. If somebody were to go into a jail, you know, you have that expectation already set about what is to be happening inside that jail. So just because somebody comes in with a strong personality does not mean that he's going to disrupt what is already happening within that very structured setting. Boot camp the same way. You know, going in the military, the boot camp, there's that expectation. And because this person might have a type A or an outgoing personality, it doesn't necessarily matter. The situation will overcome that personality. And vice versa. If it's a weaker situation, there's not as much boundaries set up. That personality then can dictate how that environment will perform. You know, I think of that as a teacher because when I come into my classroom, it's my environment. I've already set up the structure, so no matter who comes in here, no matter what the students are that come into my classroom, and they might have a great personality, they might be very social, it's my environment. This is my room, and you will do as I have set up this structure to be. Your personality is not going to control how this classroom will go. Mitchell developed a revised approach to personality centered on a cognitive affective process system, which is called CAPS. A personality is best understood as a person's habitual emotional, cognitive reaction to specific situations. So it ultimately says that, you know, this is what you predominantly have done. You've performed in this way most of the time, so you can probably will continue to perform in this way regardless of the situation that you're involved in. A strength of social cognitive theory is its focus on cognitive processes. You know, how we think about things, how we interact with things, or a mental state. Social cognitive approaches have not given adequate attention to enduring individual differences. Again, we all are unique individuals, and there's a lot of differences involved in that. And there's biological factors as well. You know, the genetic makeup of who we are plays a major part into, but unfortunately, social cognitive theory does not really focus on this. It really focuses on our social interactions even more. And then personality as a whole, you know, just saying that personality can be different in different situations. The social cognitive approach does not necessarily give appropriate attention to that. Eysenck suggested that the brain's reticular activation system, or RAS, plays a role in introversion or extroversion. So introversion being the idea that we're more isolated, you know, we like to keep to ourselves, more of a quiet nature, more laid back nature, whereas an extrovert then is somebody that goes out and likes to be more of a social butterfly, that kind of thing. He thought of these traits as the outward manifestations of arousal regulation. You know, how we have that arousal. Somebody that's more introverted might not have as much of that arousal, whereas an extroverted person might have significantly more. Gray then developed a reinforcement sensitivity theory of personality. This suggests that extroversion and neuroticism can be understood as two neurological systems that respond to environmental factors. So it's ultimately those social factors, you know, our biology, the genetic makeup, and the neurochemicals that are operating within our systems can play with the environment and the social factors to determine if we're going to be an extrovert or an introvert. You know, there may be some scientific background to reinforce this. You know, the genetic makeup of some individuals will allow them to be more outward and going. And for me, that's probably where I am. I can be very much an outward and outgoing individual, an extrovert, if provided the right situation. You know, and that's relies a lot on that sensitivity theory of personality. The behavioral activation system, rewards, is a major focus of that. And then there's also punishments, is inhibiting. So rewards will promote certain behaviors, whereas punishments or negative situations will inhibit those personality traits. Neurotransmitters play a role in this perspective. Dopamine, dopamine is associated with behavioral approach, which is an extroversion, and serotonin, neuroticism, the ability to calm down, avoid different situations, and to be much more laid back. Neurotransmitters are a major component of the biological perspectives of personality. Dopamine and serotonin, two of the main factors within this. Behavioral genetic studies have shown that the heritability of personality traits is about 50%, which makes sense. 50% from mom, 50% from dad, and that genetics does have a part in this, that because of our culture, because of our makeup, because of who we are as an individual, that does have a play into, but also there are other factors that could contribute to who we are as an individual. Studies in personality are valuable, but can't overestimate the causal role of biological factors. The different factors within our genetic makeup that can promote or discourage us from acting, behaving, or engaging in a certain way. So there are a variety of different personality assessments. One is a self-reported test. These tests assess personality by asking the participant, the individual, about their preferences and behaviors. One of the major problems with this is that the tendency for individuals to respond to social ability desired ways is extremely high. So if you know what you're supposed to respond, like, do you like to help other people? Well, of course, socially, we're supposed to help other people. So the self-reported test might reflect a higher range of, yes, I like to help other people, and no, I never get in an argument with other people. So it might be polarized depending on social expectations. Then there are empirically key tests which avoid the social desirability problems by using items that distinguish between groups, even if we do not know why the items do so. So there might be some questions or factors, there might be color differences, might be shape factors, could be a variety of different things that generally will relate to a particular character assessment. And if we can embrace those things or endorse those things, then generally we will fit into that category. Those are empirically key tests. And projective tests designed to assess unconscious aspects of personality, present individuals with an ambiguous stimulus and ask them to tell a story, and how that story plays out, then will determine how that plays into it. So we think about the ink blot or a picture. You present an ink blot or a picture, say, what does this mean to you? And then that psychologist then would assess the story that's contributed to that. If it's just a random ink blot, that yes, yet I see a chicken, and that chicken is being chased by a rat, and then that could relate to something that you feel like you are a very timid individual, but people are out to get you, and that could be the assessment that somebody gives you. All based on an ambiguous thing that you create a story from, and we determine how the social interactions will be, how they will play out based on your story that you recount to other people. It's based on assumption that individuals will project their personalities onto these stimuli. It's not always the most accurate thing. Some people can hinder their personalities or even respond in certain ways that are totally not accurate at all. They understand how this operates. They could present a whole nother life story that is not totally reflective. But doing these tests over a period of time, and even a variety of these kind of things, would help psychologists to understand more of that personality trait, and even get into some of the personality disorders, understand how those personality disorders play into social being, social lives, to make a more favorable impact on that individual. Then finally, the thematic apperception, the thematic apperception test, the acronym TAP, is a projective test that has been used in personality research. It's not one that is as dominant as others. Most of them are more social stories and that sort of thing, and we do an assessment from that. And then the thematic apperception test uses much more of those themes and be able to draw the connections between different themes to present what that personality trait might be. Other assessment methods include behavioral observation, which I feel like is conducted very frequently. Then obtaining peer reports, again, something that is used especially within the mental health field, other reports from other providers or other family and friends and that sort of thing. And the psychophysiological measures as well, probably not as used as much. Neurological measures can be used in higher order studies if there is some concerns or ongoing issues with minimal positive results from interactions and interventions. Does anybody have any questions over any of these personality assessments? That's all I've got for you. I know chapter 10 was pretty small, pretty short. Ultimately, that's really what I've got for you.